Hello and welcome to Fast Talk, your source for the science of endurance performance. I'm your host and content manager of Fast Talk Labs, Andrea Danke. Every few years, the debate seems to come up in another sport. A new style of uniform, a more aerodynamic piece of equipment, or an added technology is introduced that aids in making an athlete faster. Such innovations are rarely without controversy, and governing bodies respond to each advancement in their sport differently. Seeing the latest controversies in cycling and triathlon made me wonder, is there a line that can be drawn when it comes to fast tech? I brought this question to Rob and Grant to get their opinions and invited Dr. Ray Browning into the conversation as well. Dr. Browning is a 7-time Ironman winner and co-founder of Biomodem, a company that helps people walk through robotic gait training. Formerly, he was a professor in biomechanics, a product development consultant, and senior director of footwear research at Nike. He provides important insight into the biomechanics of innovations across several different sports. We also hear from cycling expert Leonard Zinn and Training Peaks co-founder Dirk Friel. On this episode, we go into a brief history of key fast tech advancements in swimming, running, cycling, triathlon, and my favorite, speed skating, and discuss their subsequent ban from sport or introduction into standard practice. Using these examples, we ask ourselves, when is fast too fast, and where can we draw the line when it comes to innovation in sport? So pull on your spandex and let's make you fast, but not too fast. Welcome, Ray. I'm glad that you're here. So my whole idea for this episode kind of had to do with a little bit of the current events that are going on in cycling and triathlon right now. So I noticed recently the UCI has been in the news lately because they banned head socks recently for time trials. And also we've seen some pretty bulbous time trial helmets that have been in competition. And then also recently, Ironman has banned chest fairing, which for anyone who doesn't know, that's when an athlete puts a water bottle down the front of their vest or their jersey to make themselves more aerodynamic. And it kind of just made me start thinking about these other instances in sports where this new fast tech or something that was more aerodynamic was introduced and it was very controversial. And I just kind of wanted to go over that and kind of open the floor to discussion to talk about where is the line? Is there even a line, when it comes to making tech faster, when it comes to making people faster?
Yeah, Ray, I think that you're a really interesting guest for today's episode because you have both been an athlete and you worked in innovation, right? You led innovation, sport research lab at Nike. You're doing something really innovative, even though maybe it's not athlete focused now. But, you and I first crossed paths a long time ago when you were running the Serrata Cycling Science something or other symposium. So
yep.
You've been on all ends of this spectrum. So I'm really interested to hear your opinion as we go through these topics.
Yeah, me too. The topics, I found them to be very thought-provoking. And you're right. I think innovation is always going on, always in sport. And early on in the triathlon days or cycling days, it was fun to participate. And I don't know that we ever gave it a lot of thought as to whether it should be allowed or not.
Yeah.
It was just trying to go faster. So these topics, I think that we're going to talk about today are really interesting. And it is a really fascinating question, which is, when is it cheating and when isn't it?
Yeah, and the first one that I wanted to talk about, this is what these time trial helmets and the chest fairing ban has made me think about. First off was the laser racer swimsuits. Back, I think about 15 years ago, Speedo worked with NASA to make these full-body polyurethane swimsuits that ended up being crazy fast. They were introduced at the Olympics. All these records fell, not just national, personal, but world records. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what was it that made these suits so fast, and also their subsequent banning, and maybe get everyone's opinions on whether or not they thought it was fair or not.
Yeah, I lived this.
Oh God.
I was coaching. You know what, Robert? God, you're so salty.
Woe is me.
No, I didn't get to wear. Oh, I did get to wear them. I will tell you this. Let's start with this statement. I went faster at 30 years old in the 100 breaststroke than I went when I was in college, partially because of these suits.
What was the other part? Your feet got bigger?
No, I actually trained. I actually tried. But I was coaching during this time, and the 2008 Olympic trials in the U.S. was one of the most ridiculous things you've ever seen in your life. It was people running around the pool deck from suit rep to suit rep, from the Speedo rep to the Blue 70 rep, trying to get free suits to try the one that fit and worked for them the best. And the progression was really interesting because it started with the laser and then Adidas with this full arm suit that Ian Thorpe would wear. And then Blue 70 got into the game and actually brought buoyancy into it. And then people were wearing two suits. They were wearing the buoyant suit underneath the laser because they got the compression and the buoyancy. And then there was finally this brand, Jacquard, who came out with one that had both. These suits took 15 minutes to 30 minutes to get on because they were full body and people just lost their mind. I mean, I watched one woman put on one of these suits, walk to the blocks, go to stretch, rip the back open on the suit, run to a rep, get a new suit, change on the pool deck because she just didn't care and just needed to get behind the blocks and got behind the blocks in the new suit. They were sport changing. The times changed, who was fast changed, the body type that was fast changed, the type of swimming changed. It was really amazing because it was this sport evolution contained within 2 to 3 years.
And what do you mean by the body type changes?
You got to a point with these suits where we would joke that swimming was now turning into bodybuilders in the water. You could just be massive and unbelievably strong, and the buoyancy of the suit made up for any extra mass you were carrying in the water. The buoyancy of the suit, especially for the men through the torso, allowed a posture that they didn't have. You would see their posture break down without one of these suits on in the last 15, 20% of a race. But in one of the super suits, as we called them, their posture wouldn't break down.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I obviously don't know what you would know if you've ever seen me swim. The posture that you're talking about in the water is very much like a learned technique, and being able to execute this technique certainly has major benefits in your pace.
Yeah, it's an efficiency piece, right? We'll get to it when we talk about the shoes. And I'm sure you and Ray will have a lot of input in terms of the shoes. But I did read a quote the other day that Steve Magness was saying that the super shoes take away the need for volume in training because they provide efficiency to runners. Now, there's a lot of opinion that can go into that. But what we watched in the swimming side was the learned efficiency of body position went away. You obviously had to be a proficient swimmer, but if you were weaker in the core or you tended to break down in the core in your stroke, it didn't matter anymore. The suit made up for it. And there were some other elements of that as well, just in terms of how you applied power and what you were trying to do. Because you were essentially suddenly a canoe. You were a boat. You floated, and all you had to do was propel the boat. So it really changed how people even approached individual aspects of the sport. So it was really, really interesting watching what could be a normal sport evolution over the course of 20 years, 30 years, 40 years happen in 2.
Let's break down how these helped. And then, Ray, I'd love to sort of get your take. And I don't know if you've ever worked in the swim world, but you were obviously a very successful triathlete. So I think that your thoughts are really important here. But, you know, these suits, they compressed athletes, which is going to make you more hydrodynamic.
Yes.
Right. They provided some buoyancy through trapping air, oftentimes in a neoprene type material, a foam type material. They used hydrophobic materials, right? And so that is going to reduce the friction of water and the drag of water across the surface. Increase buoyancy, less of you is in the water, so that also improves your hydrodynamicity. That's a word.
You made it is now, yeah.
And then there was some other more traditional things, right? Like they did a better job of improving where seams were placed so that they were better for hydrodynamics. They used a bonded seam, which is essentially a seam that's glued together and not sewn together, which is going to reduce sort of how tall that seam is. And then I think that they had some non-woven materials that had some hydrodynamic properties as well.
Yeah, and I want to kick this right back to Ray, because Ray will remember this from triathlon. I mean, and I'm not saying Ray was one of these, but the non-swimmers or the adult onset swimmers, people that didn't grow up swimming, prayed for wetsuit days.
Hey, tell me about it.
Right? And so what changed in terms of how you swam a triathlon swim leg in a wetsuit versus not a wetsuit, who was in the lead pack would change. And I mean, I think that was always huge while we were racing. I was racing. You were done racing when I was racing? I don't know. It was around the same time.
Probably.
Well, he was finishing ahead of you. So
Oh,
he was
he always-
always done racing by the time you were racing, Grant.
There you go.
100% the case. 100% the case. But yeah, I mean, we even got to the point as coaches saying to athletes, don't get in the pool with your race suit on before the race, because you didn't want the material to get saturated with water and then force the air out of the material. So dive in with the suit dry, and it could trap the air between you and the suit or within the material of the suit and provide that buoyancy in the suit. And you were working on this a little bit with triathlon suits.
I was, yeah. I don't know how much I can talk about this product and stuff from NDA, but right, I led innovation at Perla Zumi, and I was working on a suit for her that we could adjust the compression so that she could swim as a triathlete and then also swim and bike in the same suit. And Grant, I reached out to you and borrowed some of these suits so that I could have some competitor samples and understand how swimming suits work. But Ray, let's get you into this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the science behind it is pretty straightforward, as you talked about, both, Grant and Rob, in terms of hydrodynamics, reduced drag, better position in the water. And, I think the slippery slope that this invention really brought to light, and you never really know kind of where the origins of this are, but certainly what preceded it was a long conversation in the sport of triathlon around the differential advantages of wetsuits. And it was a problematic conversation because everybody acknowledged that less skilled swimmers were all of a sudden able to swim with far better swimmers using wetsuits than they were otherwise. So as Grant alluded to, and that's a tricky one, right? It's one thing when the technology benefits everybody the same, but when it doesn't, and certain people, whether they're because of shape or technique, that starts to get more interesting. People get a little upset about that, where the difference between, and I don't know that in the case of swimming, I have to go back and look at the results, where an individual who was the world record holder or top swimmer putting on the suit was just that much faster than it was the same, maybe it was a little bit larger difference or less large difference, but everybody just got faster, right? So if you had the suit on, so all the world records got broken, but who got second, third, and fourth and how far behind they were wasn't that much different, unless you didn't have a suit on.
It did change for some people, and it changed in the sprints primarily. Distance events, it didn't really change. It changed in the 50s and the 100s.
Yeah.
And that was interesting to watch.
Real quick, as a quick aside, you've coached long distance open water swimming as well. Did this ever, or was this a pool-based situation?
It was in both. And actually, to this day, you can wear a full body suit as long as it's natural materials. You can wear a full body suit in open water.
Okay.
So you'll see male and female athletes in a neck to ankle suit. And a lot of that was protection because of jellyfish or whatever's in the water. And that's been a component of the VAT sport now since close to 20 years.
Yeah.
And they did away with the buoyancy factor. They did away with the neoprene the same way the pool swimming did too. But what I found the most interesting about this whole progression in the suits were we were walking out of that era going, these records will never be broken. And FINA let all the records stand, right?
Yes,
they said,
that
we're
was
not
crazy.
gonna rescind all the records. We're like, no chance. They're never going to be broken. And we all should have known better, because athletes now know how to go that fast, whether it was suit aided or unsuit aided. They just went out, and a lot of it came down to the coaches. The coaches stopped saying, well, that's your suit aided best time. And we just said, that's your best time. And people went after those times. And most of those records were gone within 2 years. And they were
that quick.
That quick. And there were a couple that stood. Federico Pellegrino's record in the 400 freestyle stood for a long time.
When these suits were banned, we went back to the dark ages of swimsuits, or were some of the advancements retained?
No, we kept a lot of the advancements.
I'm thinking wool knickers.
Yeah.
We went all the way back to a full-on wool bodysuit with buttons on the front.
No, you had to wear the American flag suit that Mark Spitz wore, right? In Munich or whatever, when he won all the medals. No, we went, a lot of the materials stayed. So there was two types of material on the laser suit. There was the actual base of the suit, which was a natural fiber and really, really tight. That's where the compression came from.
Yep.
And then there would be these panels that aided in compression, but also provided some buoyancy that kind of was discovered later. Basically, what happened for the women's suits is for everybody, they banned anything below the knee and they got rid of those panels. So you still had the same underlayer suit, which was a big advancement in and of itself because of the compression factor and because of the durability of the suit and because of still an ability to trap some air underneath that because it was more hydrophobic than a straight Lycra.
Mm-hmm.
Ray, did you grow up swimming?
Mm-hmm.
So Ray will remember the era of the paper suit, which was this suit we wore that had no stretch to it at all. It was just this really, really unforgiving thing you put on. And I mean, I remember in college.
I mean, but it only covered 6 square inches of your body back in the day.
Maybe. I mean, I put one of these things on in college and I remember it being at 26. And part of me was really afraid to take my mark on the blocks.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ray remembers that vividly. And you'd try to get in the smallest suit you could get in. So there was the least give, the less flexibility, the most compression.
Mm-hmm.
But that got retained with the newer fibers, more comfort, more movability, all those things. And so suits now, way faster. You know, we kept a lot of that technological advance. But what it did do for the men especially is the upper body suit went away. So that help through the core went away.
What I love so much about this example is that what you said before is that they banned the suits, but they let the record stand. And I know a lot of people at the time, they were saying like, this is technological doping. This is not allowed. And they basically were in one hand saying, no, this shouldn't be allowed. On the other hand saying, well, it's fine.
Yeah, it really was interesting. And I think it became logistical for FINA. They just were so worried about trying to wipe the record boards and like take back gold medals and for something that the athletes really had no fault in. Mm-hmm. I mean, the suit companies drove all of this.
What's the athlete going to do? I'm not going to, on principle, I'm not going to wear this and I'm no longer going to be an athlete because of it.
And so it was an interesting kind of backtrack, but to me, the thing that was just fascinating is how quickly the records all fell. Mm-hmm. Everybody just stepped up their game.
Well, and I feel like we're talking in a very objective manner at this point. Can we give a little opinion? Are you good with that, Andrea?
I am. And like, this is another reason why I wanted to bring up this swimming example is because every time I brought it up to other people, they will give you this look and they'll be like, you don't understand. They were crazy fast. And in my mind, I'm like, well, is it crazy just because like that leap was made too soon? Like if we made this incrementally, would it be fine? And I personally, like for me, if it's just a material, if it's just your uniform, something you're already wearing, why not make it as fast as possible? Like you're already wearing something that is hydrodynamically designed. You want it to be fast in the water. So why are you drawing the line with like, well, okay, we have to stop? You know, it's too buoyant. The material is too slick. It's going through the water too fast. Which, like, watching the referees for Olympic swimming, it's like, you know, you can be a fast swimmer, but compared to, like, how you can move about the world out of the water, it's not even that fast.
No.
So I'm team, like, fast material. It's not flippers. It's not a snorkel on your face. It's just a swimsuit.
Well, Rob, I think you're on this page.
100%. Yeah. I mean, as somebody that came out of an apparel innovation world, this is the stuff that I love. And even sometimes I think that you can acknowledge that you're bending the rules or reading between the lines a little bit. I think that's part of the game. You know, another sport that I really love is Formula One. You know, there's a aerodynamicist, a car designer named Adrian Newey, who wrote a book called How to Build a Car. And it's just really interesting to go through this thought process of, what do the rules say? What are they trying to stop us from doing? And how do we do it anyway? And I just think that that's a big part of sport, to tell you the truth. And talking to you, I am so glad that you're here. I'm always, Grant, I'm so glad you're here because you said something that I think really strengthens my position. And it's that the records fell soon thereafter.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I asked the question about, well, what did we do with the suits after? If it was now 20 years later and nobody has touched those records, maybe this was something but they're gone 2 years later. I'm on team go as fast as you can with the clothing you got.
What about you, Ray? Where did you fall in this one?
I don't know. I mean,
you are free to dissent.
Well, Rob said something interesting. I thought he was going maybe in a little different direction, but the psychology of this is fascinating, right? So that if there's a new world record, and once athletes, and you can pick any sport that keeps track of such things. Some sports don't, right? I mean, so core-related sports don't have these same drivers. But this idea that pushing the envelope into something that's questionable to allow people the possibility to explore that, maybe that is possible. Maybe I can swim 400 meters that fast. It sets a new boundary for people to pursue irrespective of the level of innovation, especially when people start to think, well, maybe, yeah, the suit's fast, but so am I, right? And I think that's what's really interesting. I mean, in this example, I remember feeling like it felt unfair to the people in the prior Olympic Games, right? Or the people that had the world records that were broken. That at that moment, that did feel like, oh, gut punch, right? I just had 3 world records that were broken, in one swim meet. But, I think I'm more aligned with everybody in that it's not something that you necessarily attach. I mean, look at how they've changed the backstroke start rules.
Right.
I mean, you're underwater for almost the entire first 50 meters of the pool. They have to come up at some point, and that's way faster than it is being on the surface. The surface is choppy. There's all kinds of drag, and that had nothing to do with suits. That was just, athletes finding other ways to explore and experiment. So as long as we're keeping track of who's the fastest, we will always have this, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And, honestly, at the time, I didn't have a huge problem with the suits. And what I didn't like about the suits was the chase for the fastest suit. Mm. And what I really didn't like about the suits is how it started to go backward down the age groups. So you'd watch a 10-year-old show up in a super suit. And you're like, what? Yeah, I mean, come on, right? Like, where do we draw that line? That got hard for me as a coach because you had to navigate those things. So backtracking for me was great as a coach. But man, it was fun to watch. And I'll tell you, as a coach and an athlete at that time, like I said, I wore those suits. Mm-hmm. They weren't that much faster.
Yeah.
They were faster, but some of what was faster was the belief that you had this thing on and you were going to rip it because you just weren't going to die. You weren't going to fall apart. Like, I can finish this race. Mm-hmm. And as coaches, we just laid into that, man. Like, you got this. Don't worry. Go out fast. Take it. And as all of you guys alluded to, it allowed people to take risk. And that was fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, I think to go in like the very opposite direction for another example of fast tech would be to jump into speed skating. And I don't think I gave this background when I was first introduced, but I used to be a short track speed skater. I trained full time at the Utah Olympic Oval for several years. I was nationally ranked. This tech is long track speed skating, so it was not my sport, but I did train next to the rink where all these people were skating. So I'm a little bit familiar with it. And that is clap skates. So clap skates in speed skating are where the blade is hinged on the front of the boot. And when the skater pushes off, it extends their push. And then it claps back. It has a spring that claps back to the front so they can put their foot down on the ice and not fall. And these actually were introduced into the world scene around the 90s. They have existed, I believe, for a while among German and Dutch skaters. They're really big ice skaters out there. And they started using them on the World Cup level. And all these other skaters around the world, including Americans, just could not keep up with this. It was a literal mechanism that was making them faster. And people were trying to order them from these German and Dutch manufacturers, and they had to wait months at a time. Like, by the time the season is already over. So they literally cannot keep up. And I think it's a really interesting thing to compare to the LZR or the laser racer suits and all these other fast swimming suits, these super suits, because those were widely available to people. Like, entire countries had them as their suit. People could get them wherever. Whereas like these skates were introduced and it was not like an even playing field. And a lot of Americans were really frustrated by this because they couldn't get that tech. They couldn't keep up. And I believe the ISU was the governing body at the time, the International Skating Union. I'm not entirely sure, but they essentially allowed it to stay. They just said, like, it's an ugly introduction, but it makes the sport faster and more interesting, and we're going to allow it to stay. And now clap skates are this standard in long track. You would never go to a long track race unless you're like an absolute beginner without clap skates.
It's funny, we talk about on the swimsuit side of things, it's companies like Speedo. They make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of swimsuits a year. And I picture clap skate makers, I'm not even going to call them manufacturer, much like a cyclocross tubular maker. It's some Dutch dude in his basement smoking a cigarette, like gluing these things together.
Yeah, it probably was.
And that's why, right? You're talking about supply and demand. They could make 100 of these things a year, and they all go to, these certain athletes, and nobody else gets the access to them.
Well, and the Dutch and the Germans would make sure they'd go to the Dutch and the Germans first,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, especially the Dutch in speed skating, it's a national sport.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. But I do think it's a very interesting contrast, right? Because one thing is something you put on and, help you be a little more hydrodynamic, a little more floaty. But yeah, the difference between a clap skate and a regular skate is monumental, right?
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
huge, night and day.
Yeah.
Can I ask real quick, you were a short track speed skater. Why don't you use a clap skate in short track speed skating?
I believe it's because you wouldn't be able to hold the turns. You have so much higher G forces around the turn in short track that I don't think the blade would hold very well.
Interesting.
And also the straightaways are much shorter.
Sure.
Like half of your track is a corner.
Yeah.
And for a lot of long track, like you have very long straightaways, so you can build that speed.
Gotcha.
And you have very gentle corners, so it's easier to hold speed in the corners. Like in short track, it's really hard to maintain speed fighting those G-forces and going through that corner. It's much tighter.
And the people.
Yeah, you're fighting the people too. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by all sports, but watching long track speed skating and realizing that they are on an oval going nearly 30 miles an hour or more is mind-boggling, right? The fact that they can skate 10,000 meters in 12 minutes or less is just, when you think about that. And I still, to this day, think that the most amazing Olympic accomplishment I ever saw was Eric Heiden winning every speed skating event in the 1980 Olympic Games. Meaning he won an event that was 34 seconds long, and the longest event was the 10,000, which was for him, I think, was like 13 minutes. Think about an athlete now going into the LA or the Paris Olympics, running, it would have to be about the 300, but the 200 meters, winning the 200, the 400, the 800, the 1500, and the 5,000. I mean, that was a little bit of an aside in regards to the sport. But the other thing I think that I found interesting about this story, Andrea, was that the mechanism of why it worked wasn't what they thought. So initially, when they developed the clap skate, the idea was that the athlete will be able to more fully extend the push, which when they look at the biomechanics of that, that actually wasn't the case. What was happening is that as the athlete extended, the amount of torque you were having to push against the front of the blade. And so the pivot point from the front of the blade was way in front of the ankle joint. So it's a large moment arm. So the ankle forces required to keep the blade in position were really high. But when you move that pivot point back underneath the balls of the foot, shortened the moment arm, now all of a sudden the gastroc and soleus muscles are better able to hold the position of the blade. So I thought that was a really interesting innovation, in that the idea was, longer on the ice, better push, but actually it translated into going back to this economy question, Grant, like it's a little bit analogous to the suit in that it was really improving the efficiency of the push as opposed to the actual length of time of the push. So funny that you're back to the same mechanism, mechanically, that athletes looking for ways to get the same power output with a little bit less physiologic effort. And what do they do with it? They go faster.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point, right? That we kind of miss the boat on across the board in all these sports, is we have it backward as spectators. These things make them go faster. No, these things make them use less energy, therefore they can go faster.
Yep.
And I think that it's great that Ray says it that way, because even me, I wouldn't have thought of it that way. But getting the butt involved, I mean, makes sense. And I mean, we'll see it in each one of these things as we go down the line too. This technological advancement changes economy, therefore changes speed.
Listeners, this episode of Fast Talk has focused on gear and tech that some say has provided an unfair advantage in races. While Fast Talk Labs is not a gear review website by any means, we do offer a lot of guides on how athletes can find their own advantages from gear upgrades. Visit fasttalklabs.com to see stories on aerodynamic sensors from Rob Pickles, the best bike upgrades for your money from Trevor Connor, how much speed can be bought with Ben Delaney, the most important innovations of the past 40 years with Leonard Zinn, guides to backpacking gear from Chris Case, what to pack for a mountain bike race from Ryan Kohler, info on good bicycle saddles and cycling shoes, and even our guide on how to set up your bike computer. For science-based views on the best gear and how to use it, visit fasttalklabs.com.
You guys talking about these clap skates, and it's funny you said that you're familiar with them. I was like, you still have the echo of the clap skate probably, indelibly marked in your brain to this day from skating near them. But it's funny, I love footwear. I guess I love clap skates, even though I've never worn them, but I definitely love running shoes. And I laugh every time my kids have a track meet because my kids both have the same size foot as my wife, at least for the moment.
Oh my God.
And of course, Melissa, my wife, has all of the top of the line shoes, which means my kids are running in all of the top of the line shoes at these track meets. And I felt a little guilty, Grant, when you brought
As you should.
when you brought up the youth swimsuits. But let's talk about and Ray, I know you can probably talk a lot about this new error. Maybe that was
an error.
This new
Freudian
era
slip.
of super shoes, right? Kicked off with the Vaporfly, maybe from Nike, if we want to go that way. Now we have the Alpha Fly from Nike. We have all of these other brands. Everybody has one. Hoka has one. Saucony has one, so on and so forth. But how do we tie this new era of running shoes into this clapskate footwear technological advancement conversation?
So I was, to put it mildly, deeply involved in the development of the Vaporfly. That was the team that I led at Nike. And I will say Gung Loa, who's now at Apple, was the primary architect of that design. And it really revolved around that fundamental question about if we knew athletes that could theoretically run under 2 hours in the marathon had to have three components. They had to have remarkable economy. They had to be very economical runners. They had to have a giant engine, and they had to be able to almost redline that engine, in the 90%. But if you theoretically put those three things together, you could calculate that a sub 2 hour marathon wasn't impossible. The question really, I think, was if you gave them a boost in economy through the footwear, would it translate to those increased speeds? I think we know the answer to that now, but it wasn't really that well known at the time. And it's asking a lot of athletes because it's saying, stay near red line. You'll be able to go a little faster because you'll be more economical.
Something to point out here really quick. I think oftentimes in physiology, we see this paradox where the athletes with the biggest engine, we can term that VO2 max, tend to not be very economical. And athletes who are quite economical tend to not have very high VO2 maxes. And to find somebody who has both of those qualities is exceedingly rare.
Yeah, we identified three people out of, trust me, there were a lot more people than that were tested. We had essentially a who's who of all the fastest Nike available athletes. That obviously did not include some from Addy and other that were, under other contracts. So there were about 16 or 17 athletes who started the process, of which, and not surprisingly, the three that you ended up with, Eliud Kipchoge being the primary one. And so it was a shockingly talented group of people, where you're talking about VO2 peaks in the high 70s, low 80s, running economy that, there are a lot of ways to measure it, but was just considered extremely high. And then the ability to run at 90% of VO2 peak or 88% for an extended period of time, which that's extremely difficult to do. So I guess one thing is kudos to the people that can do that, right? I mean, there's in all of these sports, speed skating, swimming, running, cycling, they're just amazing. I mean, I don't want to forget that when we talk about the technology. But the Nike shoe, the paradigm shift that happened there was racing flats in marathon or minimalist footwear, because the idea was that adding mass to the limb, in particular adding it at the end of the foot, is really metabolically expensive, right? So you notice that when your shoes get muddy and you try to walk or run, right? You end up spending a lot more energy, not when the foot's on the ground, but swinging it through is really quite expensive. And so the conventional wisdom was light equals fast. But then the question started to be, well, hey, foams have come a long way. And is there a way to build an extremely low density foam that has a high level of resilience? So it stores and returns lots of energy. And, when you're a company like Nike, you can afford to go out and find somebody that can make that foam. You put out a spec and everybody looks at it, and most companies say, no, there's no way, it's never been done before. But some come up with it. They get their chemists involved. They see an opportunity. And so that had to happen. The chemistry had to happen. Right? It wasn't like you could just go out and I'm going to take this midsole material and I'm going to use it. People had to recognize that was important. And the difference was that what Gung understood, I think, really well is that we model running as a spring mass. You bounce on a springy leg. Right? So if you could somehow use the shoe as an accomplished in-series spring, you could reduce the necessary, because the muscles are actually contracting and providing the fulcrum by which the spring extends, right? So if you think about what's happening in your Achilles tendon, right? You're contracting the muscles, the tendon is allowed to stretch, and then it recoils, and you get that energy back without paying a lot of metabolic cost for it. But if you can do some of that storage and return of this bouncing body along the ground in your footwear, you reduce the amount that the muscles have to do to extend and then have those springs retract in the leg. And of course, in order to make that meaningful, you have to have a lot of displacement, right? You have to have a thick midsole, because you have to allow that to compress and then it will recoil. But the other thing that is important is, we tried that and it was just sloppy, right? It wasn't very clean. So then you throw in the carbon fiber plate, and carbon fiber is the stiffener that allows that function to work really, really well. So it was really fun. And, now you're seeing the shoes that were, all of those, essentially those designs were created many years ago. And, we had laid out a whole product plan of you start with foam, then you move to air, and then just because airbags turned out to be really great springs, right? And so now you see the shoes now, from Nike at least, that are using bags under the forefoot as opposed to, just a midsole foam. And, our target was, we knew that if you could improve running economy by 4%, that was going to translate to about a 2 to 3% improvement in running velocity, and that's what you needed to break the 2 hours. Because you went backwards and said, okay, to go from 2:01:35 to 1:59:59, that's 3-4%. If you can get that speed through a better economy, you should be able to break the world record without changing VO2 max or the threshold by which athletes could run, because those are much, much harder to manipulate. Right? Economy felt like it was the thing that you could manipulate with the runners. So that was kind of how we did that.
So when you were developing these Vaporflies, did you have any idea, were you thinking, well, these would also be great maybe for track running, or were you only thinking we just want to do this for marathon, we want to do this for these long distance road running events?
It wasn't even that. Our job wasn't necessarily to make a business out of it, which was sort of fun in a way. That was the rest of it was the running category's job. At the beginning, it was very much for the fastest people in the world. Breaking 2 was a really, really fun project, because it's not often that a company just throws a whole bunch of resources at a moonshot. it proved to be unsuccessful. I mean, it was close, but we always used to say it was, what was it, 159.89? Which I liked. It's like, well, we got that was the internal sort of, success mantra.
I love it.
So I would say the broader application, that was more consumer driven. People just wanted the shoe that was they thought, well, it's going to make me faster because it made Eliud Kipchoge faster. And it's probably true. It certainly does. But, this goes back to the swimming example where if you're not fast enough and you don't know how to use and run economically, run really like a really nice, efficient spring mass, there's not much benefit. Right. I mean, and coaches can work with athletes to train that, which they should. Right. But we had a job to do. These athletes needed footwear that was going to help us achieve this goal. And after that, it just got fun because we realized like, wow, this actually works. I remember when we first started to realize, holy cow, this is actually more like 4.5 or 5% changes in economy. We were measuring it with some of the first prototype shoes. It was like, holy this is actually working. And the athletes were looking at it going, what? You want me to wear this big stacked, piece of footwear? And they're used to thinking about a racing shoe. But to their credit, they were really, really receptive and provided a lot of feedback on, how it needed to work.
Ray, I'm sure that your lab has a lot of research that'll never be published. There is, for other people who are interested, I'm pretty sure it was Roger Cram's lab here at CU that did some interesting work kind of similarly around this, looking at adding foam to the treadmill deck as opposed to the shoe, using different masses on the foot to really help try to understand this problem. So definitely check out Roger. That's RODGER, Cram, KRAM at CU. Another little known fact, I designed and produced the Levitate chamois for Pearl Izumi. And in that prototyping phase, there were two materials that I used. One, Ray, was actually the cast-off foam from the development of these. So I know who your supplier is. I have foam from them. I actually use a block of this foam in my living room every day to stretch. I kneel on it to cushion my... Yeah. And I also used, back when Adidas was kind of big into Boost, when Boost was coming out, I got some Boost foam. And what's funny is I cut blocks of these foam down into the shape of chamois, shaped them on a belt sander, and spray glued them into shorts. And in some regard, they were the most comfortable thing I had ever worn and the least comfortable thing I had ever worn. Ultimately, Levitate went a different direction with foam. But so, yeah, that's just interesting. And then one other little caveat to add to this conversation, Ray, it's really interesting to me that you led this conversation off with the foam aspect and not the carbon plate aspect. And I think that this is really important because back when I was at the training center, I did biomechanics research at the training center in Colorado Springs. We had experimented with carbon plates in shoes and not necessarily saw a drastically big improvement, to tell you the truth. And I think that a lot of people today are like, it's the carbon plate, it's the carbon plate, it's the carbon plate. It might not actually be the carbon plate.
Yeah, it's important because it also lends some directional stability to the compression and recoil, right? So you get on these shoes without any good plate, and if you're not applying the ground reaction forces very well, they can feel very unstable, right? Because you've got a lot of displacement. So if you're going to land on the midfoot, in the medial part of the midfoot, you'll feel the shoe compress there, but not on the outside. So, the carbon fiber helped sort of displace the foam in a uniform way and then get the recoil, because you really just want your center mass. I will say, I did my PhD with Roger Crum. Super glad that you gave him the shout out. We contracted, I'll tell you, I don't think I can get in trouble. I've been away from Nike for long enough. But so we contracted, that was part of the deal. We contracted Roger to do the studies that he did for the shoes because we wanted some objective evidence. And, we did not participate in any way other than, making the research possible. So the paper was finished, accepted, and then we brought it back internally. And we had, in that paper, compared the Vaporfly with the Boost. They both didn't have names, but or not the Boost, the precursor. So the world record holder shoe, that was part of the protocol, was we wanted to compare it against the fastest shoe in the world. And that went all the way to the CEO of Nike, because Nike has a brand statement that they don't compare themselves to any other brand. You never see official Nike correspondence saying we're better than, different than, or anything than. There's none of that language. And they interpreted this scientific publication as a comparison. Like, wait, you can't publish this because this is us versus them. And it was quite a debate, because we were arguing that we needed the scientific validity that this would provide, that was more important than, the branding, that the paper was going to be more important from a credibility perspective. And fortunately, we were able to convince Mark Parker, the CEO of Nike at the time, that was they were willing to do that. But it was really fascinating to me that we ran into more pushback on the science than, not pushback, but just it was not something Nike was used to doing.
So I have a question for everyone. These Vaporflies, Rob, you'll have to jog my memory. I believe World Athletics allowed these for road racing, for marathon. But if I want to go run a track race, I can't use these kind of shoes.
Yeah, I'm slightly up to date because it's a concern of my wife, right, Melissa? And so, yeah, as far as I know, for road racing, 5K, 10K marathon, things of that nature, we're good to go. But with these super shoes on the track, then oftentimes it's a stack height issue. And I do believe there has to be only one carbon plate instead of two. So some super shoes I think are allowed on the track, but not all are universally because of the stack height.
So how do we feel about that?
I think it's lame. No, what's interesting actually, right? Nike has come out with additional products and a lot of research is done on Nike products. I personally love Nike. I think that's why I'm talking about it a lot, but maybe this is applicable to other brands. There was just some research that came out. I think it was a little bit more on the anecdotal side. This is not peer review published, that were comparing Alpha Flies, Vaporflies, the Nike Dragonfly, which is like the super shoe Spike. And there was essentially no difference in running economy between those three. And so in that regard, we have a track Spike version of this. But I don't know, man. I think technology is great and that we should just use technology whenever we can.
Rob makes a good point, but as a product developer himself, he may be a little biased. Let's hear from Dirk Friel on how necessary technology is to succeed in sport. Also in this clip, you'll catch Dr. Andy Pruitt asking Dirk about addiction to tech.
I think oftentimes comes down to the goal of the athlete. If the goal is to podium in any age group these days, that technology is an overwhelming part of their life. Why? Because their goal is to podium, and technology is sometimes the last remaining hurdle, or area of improvement. If goal is to finish, certainly technology can take more of a back seat. Comfort becomes more of an aspect for that athlete to get through it, comfortably. But I think almost by definition, if you want to win podium, you have to give away some comfort, not all, and the comfort can't impede the performance, but there is that balance between aerodynamics and comfort, right? So it really kind of, for me, comes down to the goal of the athlete, how much technology plays a part.
Do you believe in such a thing as technology addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be overwhelming and buying all the latest and craziest, newest doodad, whatever piece of equipment, which just has no real meaning or didn't really improve. And yeah, so you saved 20 grams, but you're a lot more uncomfortable for it now.
Well, I think what's interesting about these two examples is they're mechanical technology.
With speed skating?
Yeah, speed skating and the shoe.
When you say mechanical, can you explain that a little bit more? Because there's mechanics and physics involved in hydrodynamics and everything else.
Absolutely. I guess in my mind, I'm compartmentalizing these two things as something outside of the body that we're doing that has movement in it. Clap skate has movement in it. The sole of the shoe, the foam retracting, has movement in it.
And the swimsuits were so tight, they were basically part of your body.
There was no movement in those. I'm not even necessarily saying that the swimsuits aren't in the same vein, but where we're going next is outside of this vein. I don't have a problem with these. I like this stuff.
You just don't like it when my 11-year-olds wear them.
No, that to me, listen, I am very heavy into coaching development, sport development, and, athletic development models and things like that. And I do think these get really, really dangerous anywhere below the pro level because of, the separation it creates between the have and the have-nots. And in a time where we have, not to get too political or, geopolitical, but in a time where we have such huge wealth inequality, you have athletes who just can't go afford to buy a $300 pair of shoes, or straight up in the swimming world could not afford to buy a $400 swimsuit.
Or didn't have the connections to get it from the rep.
Right, to run and get it from a rep. So it did create a difference between the have and the have-nots, and that divide, that chasm kept growing. That's my only problem with the development in sport. And from a pure development standpoint, love it. Love it. We're going to get to this. I love the chest bearing thing. I think it's brilliant. I love that people are doing it. And I think it's this little kind of nose flick to the NGBs or the world governing bodies that are like, no, that's not proper. That's not proper. But where do you draw the line for youth, and where do you draw the line at this is where you can go do this?
It's a good question. Ray, I'd love your opinion, and I really hope that you have the opinion these shoes should be banned. Really, it's going to make me happy in my soul, Ray. Tell me you want them to be banned.
Oh,
don't say it, Ray. Don't listen to him.
I'll say it this way.
He's going to say it.
So I agree with Grant in that the challenge is, how do you make the technology accessible? Because if somebody's college is dependent on their athletic ability, and that does not include having footwear that ranks them high enough to be able to get into the school that they want to get into, et cetera. There are a lot of other peripheral effects of these potentially unequal competition that I think we have to be just mindful of, that opportunities are going to come to people that maybe are dependent on what they can acquire technologically, and that's always tricky. I don't know that I have a great solution for that, other than that there are equipment rules, along the way that whether performance or age opens up to new things. I will say from my perspective, we never even thought that we were working on something that would even consider being banned. We just were like, this isn't cheating. This is just basically thinking about how to put something underneath your foot that wasn't there before. And what was so fun about it was so different than what a racing flat looked like, before that. It was a completely different look. And so I don't see the harm in them, really. I mean, the thing that I think on the track side is, I wonder about, it's going to take athletes a little while to figure out how to optimize to those kinds of pieces of equipment, because it's never instantaneous. So the swimsuits, maybe it was a little bit more that way, but some of these other things, you actually have to learn how to coach and run in ways that take advantage of this equipment. I think the best is yet to come.
We'll get back to Dr. Browning in just a minute, but I wanted to expand a little more on the topic of barriers of entry by bringing in Leonard Zinn to get his take on fast tech.
In cycling, I still think it's still the athlete, just making the bar much higher in terms of the gear required. I mean, to compete, you have to have aero wheels. You got to have absolute minimum aero wheels and aero bars, but to even be on the map. But then really the helmet, the suit, we do chain waxing now because you can save 4 watts on your chain. Well, I don't think your aero helmet's going to save you that. And $35 to have us wax your chain which will make your chain last 7 times as long, is actually a money saving thing rather than a cost outlay. So there are still some low hanging fruit, but I think, a guy in the Tour de France time trial, you're just not going to have somebody winning a Tour de France time trial that doesn't have the highest end suit, bike, all the gear. So yes, I guess you could say that it has made it we're way too far beyond that line already, that if you're not going to go back to the days of Eddie Merckx and say, okay, everybody's just got to ride a bike with drop handlebar and the same helmet that they ride the rest of the race on, which of course he wore no helmet, we're never going back to that level. And that's not going to happen. The industry's not going to want that. The consumers watching on TV aren't going to want that. And so then that means it's going to dribble down to the same level of, all the races. That's what everybody's going to require. And it does make the barrier to entry high and will discourage a lot of people who could be great at these sports.
Ray, it's interesting if we think about running shoe technology evolution, right? We kind of started with a pretty low profile waffle racer, Nike Cortez, and then it morphed into the fairly standard running shoe that we all knew and loved. But just prior to this movement that we're talking about now was the barefoot revolution, right? And we went to one side of the spectrum, and that's
Dan Lieberman.
Yeah,
yes, thanks, Dan.
That's what's hilarious about this is we then rebounded very efficiently to the other end of the spectrum, to the maximalist sort of side of the spectrum. And with sort of the breakthrough in some of these materials, suddenly maximalism made a lot more sense because of the energy rebound, because of the decreased density of these foams.
And just less weight. I mean, you could do a big foam with less weight than you could 1 year before.
Exactly. And we look today, I'm barely a runner. I run every once in a while. And the shoes that I run in, they're training shoes, but they're this same foam, right? And I'm out there and it's like I'm on stilts that are 4 inches thick. And it's the most comfortable I've ever been with running. And running is forever changed, I think, for the better because of this pursuit of performance.
I agree. And I think there was a lot of talk about injury rates in running and whether this was going to affect them. And I will say, I don't think that my personal opinion is there are very few running injuries that are caused by footwear. They're almost all training errors. I mean, that to me is the vast majority. So this idea that somehow we design footwear, and I'm actually kind of, one of the things that's been nice about this departure from that conversation, right? We're talking about comfort and performance and language, not talking about reducing injury. And as people were looking to footwear to solve the injury problem, well, we tried that for 30 years and it didn't work. Rates of running injury are the same as they were in the 1970s. So, I mean, it's kind of nice that this conversation got us a little bit beyond that, that we're now not trying to promise people, and they're having a better experience. So what's wrong with that? If something that started off to try to make athletes go faster makes running more comfortable for a recreational runner, geez, that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
And to even further that point that Ray is making about running shoes and injury, there is even significant research at this point looking at, say, the stability level of the shoe and medial posting with the harder density. Because for a long time it was like, oh, you overpronate, and so you need this stability or this motion control shoe. And there's research now that is like injury rates are kind of the same no matter what shoe, if you're matching the shoe to the person or not. So I think that you're right. Outside of any sort of traumatic sort of instance that happens, you twist your ankle because you stepped on a rock or whatever. Yeah, we're probably talking, training here more than anything.
And also keep in mind, brands in the space have a motivation to change the style and the focus, because it's like I'm fascinated watching the gravel thing happen in cycling. I mean, I grew up riding bikes and there was no gravel bike, but we always rode on gravel.
Yeah.
Right. But now that we've created a category, it's allowed these businesses to emerge, which is great for the cycling industry. Right. And it's the same thing for the running footwear industry, is that we kind of broaden the landscape a little bit. Maybe more people participate, they have a different experience. They use the footwear for different things. And it'll swing right back to something else. And part of that will not be because it's better, partly because it will be different and people will have forgotten that, oh yeah, that was what we used in the 1970s, which I find entertaining, but also not surprising given the fact that you have to continue to keep your consumers interested in what you're doing.
Not even your consumers, your audience.
The audience.
I'm not a consumer of speed skating. I'm not a consumer of swimming. I know about these sports. These sports were brought to the forefront of my attention ultimately because of these innovations that we're talking about. I watched more swimming because of the craziness of these swimsuits than I would have. Same thing with speed skating and collapse suits. I mean, running is a world that I guess I'm in, but I think that these sports benefited maybe even from increased participation down the line because people became fans of the sports because they were relevant and worth talking about.
Oh, 100%.
Yep.
I mean, what we see and what we've seen in participation rates in swimming post-Olympics. It's one of the big things that swimming's suffering with after COVID is the Olympics got pushed back by a year. The viewership was down. The attendance was down. Those things were down because of the pandemic. And swimming watched less kids get into the sport. They missed out on their Olympic bump that they get every 4 years. These Olympic sports depend on this. People they really don't watch them the rest of the time. So I think it's going to be even interesting to see what shows up in Paris.
Yeah. And this was, you were saying before, Andrea, you got into speed skating because you saw it in the Olympics. And the more people that are talking about sports like this, the more kids see it, the more healthy that sport ends up being.
I don't think I knew speed skating existed before I saw it on TV. And it was just exciting to see it on TV. And it's not something that you can go and like watch at like a high school track meet. It's not really accessible everywhere. Yeah. So moving back to more current events, I think it's time to talk about chest fairing and time trial helmets. These are what people are talking about now. Chest fairing is a little bit different because it's not like an actual product someone's putting out there. It's just what athletes are doing with what they already have. And Grant, you seem really excited to talk about it.
I'm ready, man.
Do you want to start?
I got my chest fairing in. I'm ready.
I wish we had a huge fan blowing on 30 miles an hour right now.
Yeah, but that hair will slow him down.
And
so
let me
he
tell
needs
you,
all the chest fairing he can get.
Everybody's going to watch how much more economical I get with my speaking.
Yeah, there we go.
Like I said before, I love the chest fairing. I just love this idea of I'm going to take a bottle, I'm going to shove it down my shirt, and suddenly I get this increase in aerodynamics. I think it's like the people's champion. And you know, and
it's
there's
the grassroots effort to performance improvement.
Yeah.
It costs no money.
Exactly.
It doesn't need some dude with a PhD.
Exactly. Well, yeah, to tell us it works, we need the Ray Brownings of the world, but like we can just do it. I think that's kind of really cool, right? People finding these ways. And I'm a cycling fan of the 90s. I wasn't even racing my bike, and I watched the tour. I remember Le Mans tour with the aero bars. And I thought it was awesome. And it was this rah-rah American moment of like, look at American innovation beating the old school French guy. And, that side of it is neat. Now, what's hard for me is I go from the fairing, which I love, to the helmet, which I hate.
Oh, do tell.
Well, there's just like I said before, we had this conversation, I think at a potluck, where I said where I struggle is this idea when the thing doesn't look like the thing anymore. When the helmet doesn't look like a helmet anymore, I struggle with that. When a bike frame starts looking like a solid sail.
What should a bike frame look like?
It should have a triangle, a rear triangle. It should have a front fork. I mean, I don't know. It's a bike. I can't define it, and I wish I could do a better job of.
So you just tell us that you're an Eddie Merckx fan without telling us you're.
No,
an Eddie
I'm
Merckx
not
fan.
an Eddie Merckx fan. That's not what I'm trying to say. Good God, Robert. I think the aerodynamics thing is massively cool because we're seeing this in gravel. We're seeing it in triathlon. How do I make a major change in my movement through the air that makes me go faster without a huge output or change in who I am?
You're on a soapbox. I want to keep this going with another example. Gravel frames. Gravel is great. It's a sport where people are kind of allowed or encouraged to do things a little bit different, where road cycling is very like, this is the box you got to fit in it.
Yeah.
Right? Another thing that happens on gravel, I want your opinion. What about a frame bag that covers up the majority of the frame for storage and also probably has some aerodynamic benefit too? You good with those or no?
Fairing, right?
Yeah, I'm fine with them. Honestly, I am. I hate watching people out for an hour and a half ride with a frame bag that could hold, a tent. And
where else do I keep my espresso machine when I ride in Boulder? I don't need to stop at the coffee shop. I am the coffee shop.
Not to get on the soapbox, but I do want to come back to what Ray said about gravel. We live in here at Boulder, and when we were training back in the day, St. Vrain, which is one of these major routes, was all dirt, and we rode it all the time. And we rode all those dirt roads all the time. There's no cars on them. And we were riding them on 19 tires, and we were riding them on downshifters. It was great.
Caveat being, Boulder gravel is brown pavement.
It is brown pavement. That's a fair statement. We are not talking unbound here. But it was fun to do that, and it's fun to watch people get pulled into the sport, much like what we were talking about with swimsuits or clap skates or the Vaporflies, because you have this thicker tire and it's a more comfortable ride and it's accessible. And some of these places that don't have a million cars going 55 miles an hour are suddenly accessible. I love that about the sport. And I love the ability to turn around and stick a bottle down your shirt and gain 10 watts.
Just don't do it with a bulbous helmet on.
No, and again, but the helmet comes back to the same thing I've been saying over and over again. You're buying speed. It's money. And it's money that not everybody has. Rob, don't roll your eyes at me, Boulderite. He's just not going to say anything to me now. He's just going to stare at me.
I have nothing to say to you anymore, Grant.
I mean, it's a really interesting thing to talk about, like a financial barrier, because for speed skating, since this is my sole point of reference, speed skates are very expensive. Custom molded speed skates, they're thousands of dollars. Yeah. And as you know, by the time I quit, US speed skating was not giving you your boots. You got your boots yourself. And blades are hundreds of dollars. Like, you have to live in a place that has access to these training facilities. Like, it's unfortunate. I wish speed skating was more accessible, but I think it's a part of, like, if you do want to be at a higher level with these sports, you do kind of have to be able to have these expensive things. You have to be able to have a good bike. If you want to race at a high level in cycling, you do have to have a good bike.
Even a cheap bike is an expensive bike.
Yeah, exactly. It can still cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So how do you make it more accessible to people? But I do think, like, innovation should keep happening. I think the time trial helmets are actually a little bit like the swimsuit controversy, because it's just about making something you're already wearing more fast. And I think where people have issue with it, maybe not you, but where people have issue with it is just because it looks so silly. Like, people are calling it dark helmet from Spaceballs.
Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
Not too far off.
Not far off at all. I do think that's one of the things that's really hard for people, right? And I mean, I even said it, the thing doesn't look like the thing. But at the same time, that's to, cut my own argument. That's true of everything we change. Mm-hmm. I mean, even the running shoes, as Ray was saying, you're looking at people running on these pillows strapped to their feet. And that's even, if you're a fan of running, that's hard to get your head wrapped around.
And top tubes that aren't level with the ground is hard to get your head wrapped around too.
Yeah. And so I think all this, I mean, I get my old man soapbox and, like, the thing doesn't look like the thing, but at the same time, like, every innovation changes what a thing looks like. Like you said, I'm not a Merckx fan, so I almost cut my own argument in half just with that statement. Because I love an aerodynamic tubing.
Mm-hmm. As long as it has a rear triangle and a front triangle.
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground maybe, which I always liked the hour record in cycling. And at least I haven't followed it too recently, but it was considered sort of the gold standard of a career. If you were a good time trialist, you at some point pursued the hour record, right? How far you could ride in an hour. And it was fairly controlled for a long time, like what equipment you could use during that hour record. And the idea was that, all right, let's take all the stuff off, put you on an oval, ride as far as you can go in an hour. And whoever rides the farthest is the best rider. Everything else has kind of been discounted. And I think we've lost a little bit of that sometimes. There isn't sort of the event that is it's the thing that people can decide to do to compare themselves, right? Without all of the technological accoutrements that they might have access to. And I think when you have both, great, you get to innovate, explore, do wild things, but then you can come back to this event, and this event is like, oh man, this is all about you. I like that contrast, like in cycling, because it allows you to have wildly innovative things. I think being involved in the sport of triathlon, I went from cycling into triathlon in the mid-1980s. I mean, you were experimenting every week, right? Somebody was coming out with a different handlebar design or a different place to put a water bottle or a helmet or a fabric or it was just the Wild West. Steve Head was inventing wheels and I was a head rider, he would be like, Ray, okay, I've got something else to try. We'd be like, all right, we didn't know if it was going to work or not.
And one of those wheels, if I remember right, had movable weights that would move from the hub toward the rim to increase the inertia. It was a crazy time we're talking.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And so I'm an entrepreneur. Long live innovation. Yeah. The fairing thing to me feels a little bit different because it's just kind of like you guys say, anybody can do it, right? We can all stuff a water bottle in a jersey, and if you understand aerodynamics, the irony to me is aerodynamic drag doesn't really become super important if you're riding 12 miles an hour. Or 15 miles an hour, right? So, there's a certain element of people on bikes and or going uphill on bikes, right? Where it's completely not a conversation. It's got an application, which is I'm on relatively flat terrain and I'm capable of riding fast. Somebody's sustained power output's 125 watts. And you can put a loaf of bread in there. You can put a lot of things in there, but it's not going to make very much difference.
I do like what you were saying about the track. I do love that idea of we're going to put everybody on the track on the same bike and see who can ride the furthest, because speed is the ultimate metric here, right? We get lost in this world of metrics about talking about power. We talk about cadence. We talk about this, watts per kilo, all that. The only thing that matters is speed.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Even if we take the track, let's take the hour record. Where were a lot of these hour records set?
Altitude.
Mexico City. Why?
Because it's high and there's less air resistance.
Yeah.
And you crank up inside the actual arena, you crank the humidity up to...
Exactly where I was going. Why is altitude bad? Because your power output is low. For the most part, the equation kind of works out. You lose this much power, but you go that much faster for aero. Okay, how do we maximize both, right? We're talking about maximizing aerodynamics through a non-equipment means.
Mm-hmm.
Going to Mexico City was totally fine. Bradley Wiggins went to sea level, maximized his power, but also then manipulated the temperature and the humidity in the velodrome so that he could improve his aerodynamics.
Yeah.
Or the density of the fluid through which he's riding.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, I remember when we were working on the hour record with Neil and Evie, all that was in play.
Yep.
We were talking about all of that stuff, and I wasn't doing much with that, actually. I was on the periphery looking at it going, this is awesome. But I don't know, I like that innovation and I like that movement. And so many of these things, I don't know where I stand because I'll just contradict myself back and forth the whole time because there's parts of it I really like. And then the aesthetic part of it, the helmet, is just that it's awful.
So real quick, let's level set kind of on these aerodynamics changes that we're talking about right now, because they are pretty severe. And for a long time, I think that when people were thinking about aerodynamics, coefficient of drag times area, they were really focused on reducing the body surface area. That was relatively easy to do. A lot of my master's research had to do this, and I was calculating frontal area of riders in different positions and everything else. And then we were talking about, suits and materials and how do we improve the coefficient of drag through texture. At Pearl Izumi, we had a very fast time trial suit that was very specifically about how the arm sleeve blended into the main body, right? And then we were talking about helmets and, oftentimes they would reduce the ventilation in helmets so that the air flowed a little bit easier around that. But now we're evolving into this place where aerodynamics is kind of coming about as wearable fairings for people. Mm-hmm. And the helmets that we're seeing today, the reason that they are so jarring to people is that you're wearing a giant fairing on your head and that the helmet is really designed to move the air around your shoulders, around your body, around these other areas that were otherwise facing the wind. And it's the same thing with the water bottle down the front of the jersey acting as a fairing. We're filling a gap. We're helping the air flow in a more laminar manner, a smoother manner over the body so that it's not building up in this high pressure, sort of dense area underneath your chest by filling in that hole. Same sort of thing. There are people who, I'll call them out specifically. The guys from Silka, Dylan Johnson, they've been doing some really cool stuff with their content creation on YouTube and even testing wearing hydration packs, which you would assume would be super duper slow, but worn in the right position, it's potentially filling in the gap and helping that airflow off your helmet and everything else. So we're in the era of the fairing, and that feels different to people than a new material or a new fabric on the skin suit, or even just wearing a one-piece skin suit instead of a nice floppy shirt and jersey.
Yeah, it changes what it looks like. That's what people are having trouble with. And it's the same thing that I have trouble with when I first look at this, right? It changes what it looks like to be a cyclist.
Yep.
And I think where we're going to continue to see so much of the innovation. I mean, Ray alluded to it when he was racing. I remember when I was racing and I wasn't even really that good, and Hind was handing me material after material after material to try in the pool. Try this, try this, try this, try this. And it was like weekly. They were trying something different.
Yep.
So much of that innovation comes out of triathlon because there isn't the history. There isn't this is the beauty of the sport. This isn't what it should look like, right? And so triathlon is innovating. And in a lot of ways, cycling is coming back to that and then pulling pieces out that make sense.
Yep.
And then we're seeing that in gravel. I think the gravel thing will be completely moot in 2 years. I think everybody should record this and prove me wrong in 2 years, but gravel is going to turn into just another bike race. It's going to be pack racing.
Isn't it now?
Unbound this year was the first time we saw that. A pack of 15 to 20 riders riding the whole race together. It slowly dwindled down. You had 2 guys off the front. You had a pack of guys that was looking specifically at Keegan going, you do the work. Keegan didn't do the work. The 2 guys stayed away. Lachlan won. It really followed the traditional mold of a bike race. And gravel hasn't always done that because, you know, the strongest guy can win, especially in lifetime when you have that much climbing. Unbound changes it because there's less climbing.
Yeah.
But as we go to a place where it looks a little bit more like traditional racing on the bike, the aerodynamic stuff matters just a little bit less.
Well, I'm going to throw a curveball into this conversation and say I think that both of these things should be banned. And not because of a traditional aesthetic thing, because of a safety thing.
That's fair.
I would hate to see what happens to bike crashes are bad. I would hate to see what happens to somebody's sternum and chest and ribs and heart and everything else when they crash face first onto a water bottle on their chest. And I asked the question, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm sure that these helmets are passing standard safety protocols, but I have to wonder when you have a helmet that is now 6 inches off the side of your head and your head hits the ground, what is that torque, that increased moment arm, what is that torque doing to your neck and to everything else? I question if there's a safety element, and I would 100% ban something if there's a safety risk.
I agree with that. And I'll throw it back to Ray. I'll remember these. A lot of the old helmets were not helmets. Rudy Project came out with this helmet, and it was like, I remember watching the Giro one year going, we got to get those helmets. And we called up Rudy Project because they were a sponsor at the time. We said, we want those helmets. And they laughed at us and said, those aren't helmets. That's literally a piece of foam. And that's all they are. And it was just an outward appearance thing. And sure, they were interested in safety, but like they were on one end of that spectrum. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. A full water bottle, landing on that thing.
Only bad things come of that.
What if the helmets had airbags?
Using innovation to solve the problems that innovation creates.
Love it.
I like it.
Love it.
Have you ever been a product developer?
Happy to start.
You know, I think, Andrew, you had a really nice way of framing the place of innovation. If innovation leads people to discover a sport that maybe they don't know that much about, but they're heard about, wow, you should check out these new skates these people are using on ice, or you should check out these new bicycle helmets. Somewhere along that journey, somebody's going to be inspired by that. It might even inspire them to do that thing, but it's going to inspire them in some other way. And when sport inspires, everybody wins, right? I mean, I just fundamentally believe that's true because we probably all grew up wanting to be some sort of a sports hero, champion, whatever it happens to be. And so if the innovation is the catalyst for that attention, and that attention leads to inspiration, then we all win, right? People get healthier, they do more things outside, they enjoy life. And that, to me, feels really, really important. What we really want is we want as many people as possible to share in the joy that we get from being athletic.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think we should do.
That's the ending point.
That's
he
it.
said
That was another episode of Fast Talk.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that I sometimes say, and everybody's like, well, I guess we end there. No, we are ending on that. That was brilliant.
No, I
couldn't agree more with that.
I love that. I definitely agree. I think innovation should always still be happening. And I think, every single one of these examples is controversial just because change is hard. But I mean, I'm glad that it happens. Like, we're not racing on bone shaker bicycles with a giant front wheel and a tiny back wheel because people have changed the designs of bikes over the last 100 years. And I think that's a great thing. And I think it always takes some growing pains when new things are introduced. It's hard to figure out where everyone can compromise.
Yeah, and kudos to you guys for living in this space about human movement. There are so many distractions for humanity right now that are not positive. And thank God the Paris Olympics are coming, because it's like our 1 month of just celebrating, right? Like, as a civilization, we all watch events and we jump up and down and we cheer and we cry and we do all of these things for, 30 days in the summer. And man, the world needs that right now. It's so much more than it has in any other time. And I mean, I'm 62. So, this innovation and this topic and what you guys are talking about, it is incredibly, I've never felt like it was more important.
That was another episode of Fast Talk. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. Subscribe to Fast Talk wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and be sure to leave us a rating and review. Do you have an example of when you thought Fast Tech went too far or was unreasonably banned? Let us know at forums.fasttalklabs.com or tweet us at Fast Talk Labs. As always, we love your feedback. For Ray Browning, Rob Pickles, Grant Holligy, Leonard Zinn, and Dirk Friel, I'm Andrea Danke. Thanks for listening.